Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. The Senate defeats a War Powers Act resolution that would have limited President Donald Trump's ability to launch military attacks on Iran. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says of the operations against Iran, more and larger waves are coming. We are just getting started. And President Trump says the U.S. had to strike Iran because, quote, if we waited any longer, if we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem testifies before the House Judiciary Committee on immigration enforcement operations and the shooting deaths of 2 protesters by federal agents. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the State Attorney General Keith Ellison testify before the U.S. House Oversight Committee on fraud in public aid programs. And President Trump says he has secured a pledge from big technology companies to pay for the large quantity of electricity needed for AI data centers, so the cost is not passed on to American households. That and more coming up on Washington Today. CBS News writing the Senate defeated a War Powers resolution that sought to block President Trump from using further military force against Iran, rejecting a Democratic push to rebuke the president amid the administration's shifting justifications for the war and warnings about more American casualties to come. In a 47-53 vote, the resolution fell short of the simple majority it needed to advance. With Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania voting against the measure, it needed the support of at least 5 Republicans. Only Republican Rand Paul of Kentucky supported it. Reporting from CBS News. Here's some of the debate before the vote. Senator John Hickenlooper is a Democrat from Colorado.
Right now, the U.S. and Israel are hitting targets all across Iran. The Trump administration entered this war with no plan of what comes next, and now the killing of Iran's supreme leader has left that country facing a dangerous, uncertain future. The conflict is spreading. Iran is retaliating by launching missiles at U.S. bases and partner countries across the Middle East. The entire region has now been dragged into this war, and 6 American soldiers are already dead. As we speak, more troops, our courageous men and women, are being deployed into this volatile region, all to fight a war of choice that is illegal. It's a war that the American people don't want. The administration can't agree on a joint goal, strategy, even an endgame. They don't seem to have one. They didn't anticipate how to evacuate hundreds of thousands of Americans living in or visiting in the Middle East, who are now being told to flee a war zone, but can't because the airspace is closed. The United Kingdom has been evacuating its citizens throughout the region, but our government, which has been planning this attack for months, doesn't seem to have plans for Americans. These are worse than mistakes. They're failures that are already costing American lives and throwing the region into chaos. All the chaos serves a purpose. It distracts from the president's failures at home, the rising prices, the violence of ICE against American citizens, the unreleased Epstein files. And while this White House wages war abroad, working Americans are barely treading water at home. Over the last year, the president's disastrous and illegal tariffs have crushed small businesses in Colorado and across the country. They've raised costs for all Americans. Tariffs clearly are a tax on Americans.
Senator John Hickenlooper, Democrat from Colorado, on the Senate floor today during debate on the War Powers Act resolution on Iran. Opposing the resolution, Senator John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, the majority whip.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak in strong opposition to what the Democrats are putting forward on this floor of the United States Senate today. It is a War Powers resolution. Let me expose this resolution for what it is. The Democrat resolution undercuts Americans' peace through strength. Just heard the minority leader come to the floor, and he said, no one has the guts, he said, to stand up to him and say he's wrong. I think he was talking about President Trump. Let me tell you, the Republicans are going to stand up to Chuck Schumer and to Tim Kaine, who's brought this resolution today on the floor of the United States Senate, and say to them, you're wrong. You're wrong. The purpose of the War Powers Act of 1973 is to ensure consultation and reporting. Never intended to allow Congress to micromanage military operations. Under the statute, a president must notify Congress within 48 hours. President Trump did that. Members of this body were further briefed yesterday by top officials from the administration. The law then provides a 60-day window for continued military action. Now, many people believe the War Powers Act is actually unconstitutional. The Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief. Every modern president has exercised this authority. President Clinton did it in the Balkans. President Obama did it in Libya. President Biden did it in Syria and the Gaza Strip. So why do Democrats object today? Why? It's because Donald Trump is president of the United States. That's why they're doing this. Democrats would rather obstruct President Trump than obliterate Iran's national nuclear program. Let that sink in. That's what the Democrats are trying to do. They want to use the War Powers Act as a partisan battering ram. This is Senator Kane's 5th War Powers resolution since President Trump returned to office a little more than a year ago. These resolutions have been used only 11 times in 50 years since the law was passed. The senator from Virginia alone accounts for nearly half of them. Yet Senator Kane introduced no War Powers resolutions, 0, when Barack Obama and Joe Biden were president.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, the majority whip on the Senate floor. The Senate went on to defeat Senator Kane's War Powers Act resolution on Iran by a vote of 47 to 53. It was mostly party line. One Republican voted yes, Rand Paul of Kentucky. One Democrat voted no, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. The House also debated an Iran War Powers Act resolution today, but the vote on that will be on Thursday. And the House debated a non-binding House resolution declaring it is a policy of the U.S. that Iran continues to be the largest state sponsor of terrorism. A vote on that also expected on Thursday. Politico writing that top Pentagon officials on Wednesday suggested that the Iran war could extend into a longer conflict, saying the fighting is, quote, far from over, even as they declined to explain what ultimate victory might look like. The warnings from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane about an enduring conflict were the first from military officials, and they underscored President Donald Trump's predictions over the past several days that the campaign could last for several weeks. That was from Politico. Here is Secretary Hegseth at the Pentagon news conference.
I stand before you today with one unmistakable message about Operation Epic Fury. America is winning, decisively, devastatingly, and without mercy. Under the direct command of President Trump, the War Department unleashed this operation early Saturday morning, just 4 days ago, which means we need to remember two things. First, we are only 4 days into this. Metrics are shifting, dust is settling, and more forces are arriving. It's very early. And as President Trump has said, we will take all the time we need to make sure that we succeed. Second, we are only 4 days into this. And the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead this. Only us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it. Or at least, soon enough, they will know it. And we have only just begun to hunt, dismantle, demoralize, destroy, and defeat their capabilities, just 4 days in.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth opening up a Pentagon news conference. Later in his statement, he spoke about the sinking of an Iranian warship and media coverage of the conflict.
In fact, last night, we sunk their prize ship, the Soleimani. Looks like POTUS got him twice. Their Navy, not a factor. Pick your adjective, it is no more. In fact, yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win. Also, yesterday, the leader of the unit who attempted to assassinate President Trump has been hunted down and killed. Iran tried to kill President Trump, and President Trump got the last laugh. Now, this is not a mission accomplished situation. This is simply a reality check. The combination of U.S. and Israeli intelligence and combat power will control Iran, and will control it soon. Sure, Iran will still be able to shoot some missiles and still be able to launch one-way attack drones at civilian targets, and their proxies will attempt to attack our embassies, bases, and soft targets. They are terrorists, after all, and they need to target civilians because they can't fight toe-to-toe. But we will find them, and we will kill them. This is what the fake news misses. We've taken control of Iran's airspace and waterways without boots on the ground. We control their fate. But when a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality. The terms of this war will be set by us at every step.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at a Pentagon news conference along with General Dan Kane, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Later at a White House news conference, the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was asked by CNN reporter Caitlin Collins about Secretary Hegseth's remarks.
Given what Secretary Hegseth said this morning, is it the position of this administration that the press should not prominently cover the deaths of U.S. service members?
No, it's the position of this administration that the press in this room and the press across the country should accurately report on the success of Operation Epic Fury and the damage it is doing to the rogue Iranian regime that has threatened the lives of every single American in this room. If the Iranian regime had their choice, they would kill every single person in this room. And so we can all be very grateful that we have an administration and that we have men and women in our armed forces who are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the rest of us in this room and for every American across the country and for every troop that is based in the Middle East. That's what these...
Secretary Hegseth was complaining that it was front page news about these 6 service members who were killed.
That's not what the Secretary said, Caitlin, and that's not what the Secretary meant, and you know it. You know you are being disingenuous. There is not... We've never had a Secretary of Defense who cares more...
Drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad. Yeah, as you know, we cover the deaths of U.S. service members under every president.
The press does only want to make the president look bad. That's a fact. Especially you. No, listen to me. Especially you and especially CNN. And the Secretary of Defense cares deeply about our war fighters and our men and women in uniform. He travels all across this country to meet with them, to connect with them, and your network has hardly ever probably reported on that. You also had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Chairman Kane, who's a brave patriot, standing alongside the Secretary at the Pentagon this morning, again expressing his condolences to these families. And I just told you that the President of the United States will be attending their dignified transfer. So please,
that's not making the president look bad. That's showcasing that.
We expect you to cover that as you should. We expect you to cover that as you should, Caitlin. But you and your network know that you take every single thing this administration says and tries to use it to make the president look bad. That is an objectable fact.
I don't think covering troop deaths is trying to make
if you're trying to argue right now that CNN's overwhelming coverage is not negative of President Donald Trump, I think the American people would tend to agree, and your ratings would tend to disagree with that as well.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt questioned by CNN Chief White House Correspondent Caitlin Collins at today's news conference in the White House briefing room. Washington Post writing the 6 U.S. service members killed in an Iranian drone attack over the weekend were working in a tactical operations center in Kuwait that offered little protection from overhead strikes, according to imagery experts and officials. They're the only U.S. troops known to have died in retaliatory strikes since the operation in Iran began Saturday. At least 11 American military outposts have been hit, along with bases belonging to France and Britain, according to a Washington Post review of satellite images and videos. The Pentagon identified 4 of the 6 soldiers on Tuesday, all of whom served in the Army Reserve out of West Des Moines, Iowa. That was from the Washington Post. Today on the Senate floor, Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, spoke in tribute.
Last night, we received sad news and awful news that 4 Army Reserve soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command, based out of Des Moines, Iowa, were killed in Kuwait amid Operation Epic Fur. That includes Sergeant Declan Cody, who was from West Des Moines, Iowa. I'm deeply saddened to learn of the 4 passing. They represent the best of Iowa and the best of America. We should never forget their sacrifice and their service. Barbara and I are praying for their loved ones in this time of grief, and we continue to pray, as I hope all Americans will, for the safety of all soldiers serving in harm's way.
Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, on the Senate floor. News Nation did a breakdown of the 40,000 to 50,000 U.S. military service members at land bases in the Middle East. About 13,500 are in Kuwait, 8,300 in Bahrain, 4,000 in Jordan, 3,500 in United Arab Emirates, 2,700 in Saudi Arabia, 2,500 in Iraq, and 2,000 in Syria. President Donald Trump gave an update today about the war, saying that Iran was just a couple of weeks away from acquiring nuclear weapons.
We're doing very well on the war front, to put it mildly, I would say. Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. And we're going to continue to do well. We have the greatest military in the world by far. And that was a tremendous threat to us for many years. 47 years they've been killing our people and killing people from all over the world. And I think we have great support. And I think if we didn't do it first, they would have done it to Israel and give us a shot if that was possible. And if we didn't terminate the worst deal, one of the worst deals ever made, the Obama nuclear deal, I call it the Obama nuclear deal, where he gave everything to Iran, including a nuclear weapon. It was a road to a nuclear weapon. Bad things would have happened 4 years ago, because they would have had a weapon 4 years ago if I didn't terminate that deal. So we're in a very strong position now, and their leadership is just rapidly going. Everybody that seems to want to be a leader, they end up dead. And it's an amazing thing that's taking place before your eyes, because for 47 years we were pushed around, and we shouldn't have been. And I think I can say, and you see it as well as I do, you see the tremendous progress that's being made. Their missiles are being wiped out rapidly. Their launchers are being wiped out. They're attacking their neighbors. They're attacking their, in some cases, allies, or not so long ago allies. And, you know, it's really a nation that was out of control, and they would have used it on us if we let them, if we waited any longer. A big factor was Soleimani, the killing of Soleimani in my first term. And maybe the biggest factor was the rebuilding of the military in my first term. And then the B-2s hit the, and I use the word obliterate because it was a complete obliteration of their nuclear potential. And that set them back very, very seriously. If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. If we didn't do the B-2 attack a number of months ago, they would have a nuclear weapon. And when crazy people have nuclear weapons, bad things happen.
President Donald Trump at the start of an event on a different subject, electricity rates and AI data centers, held in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Associated Press reporting about the war. The tempo of the strikes on Iran was so intense that state television announced the mourning ceremony for Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the conflict, would be postponed. Millions attended the funeral of his predecessor, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, in 1989. In addition to striking Tehran on the fifth day of the conflict, Israel hit the Iranian-backed Hezbollah militant group in Lebanon, while Iran fired on Bahrain, Kuwait, and Israel. As the conflict spiraled, Turkey said NATO defenses intercepted a ballistic missile launched from Iran before it entered Turkey's airspace. The war has killed more than 1,000 people in Iran and dozens in Lebanon, while disrupting the supply of the world's oil and gas, snarling international shipping, and stranding hundreds of thousands of travelers in the Middle East. That was from AP. From the Hill, Congressman Pat Ryan, Democrat from New York, on Wednesday went after those Republicans who are adopting tough language to promote the Iran conflict without ever having served in the armed forces themselves. He told reporters on Capitol Hill, "If I hear one more chicken hawk who's never served a single day in uniform sitting in a gold-plated office in D.C. or in Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else try to talk tough having never seen what war is about, I'm going to lose my mind." That was from The Hill. He held a news conference on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building with other House Democrats who are veterans. Here is Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander of New Hampshire. She served as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve, reaching the rank of lieutenant.
The president has launched a war of choice against Iran. 6 patriots have given their lives in this war already. Thousands of fellow Americans are stranded in the Middle East right now. Gas prices, oil prices have spiked like nothing we've seen in decades. The president did this without a clear reason. It's a shifting set of rationales that is an insult to every American who loves this country and who understands that war is hell. He cannot answer the basic question of how this ends, and what he has done defies common sense and the Constitution. So anyone who's served in uniform understands that you don't write a blank check to any president to wage war. And as members of Congress, we will be relentless in upholding our oaths to this Constitution and in doing our jobs. And that starts with passing a war powers resolution that should have come to the floor of the House long ago, and that in a disgraceful and dangerous dereliction of duty, the Speaker of the House has stood in the way of Congress in doing our job for the American people. We will be relentless because the people of this country, every person who served in uniform, deserves answers and accountability.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, Democrat from New Hampshire, at a news conference on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol in Washington with other House Democratic representatives who have served in the military. The Senate today defeating a War Powers Act resolution that would limit the president's ability to conduct war against Iran. And the House debated it today, plans to vote on it on Thursday. Now to international reaction to the war. AP writes that opposition politicians accused United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Wednesday of weakening Britain's special relationship with the United States by differing with U.S. President Donald Trump over Iran and drawing his ire. Trump on Tuesday called Britain uncooperative and slammed Starmer as not Winston Churchill. After Starmer initially rebuffed the U.S. request to use UK bases for attacks on Iran, the Prime Minister later said American planes could use bases in England and on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia to strike Iranian missile systems that are targeting British allies in the Middle East. That was from AP. Here is one of the opposition questions to the Prime Minister during Prime Minister's question time in the House of Commons in London.
Mr. Speaker, the United States of America is our most important international strategic ally. Does the Prime Minister believe that his dithering and equivocal response to events in the Middle East this week has made that relationship stronger or weaker?
Mr. Speaker, the American planes are operating out of British bases. That is the special relationship in action. British jets are shooting down drones and missiles to protect American lives in the Middle East on our joint bases. That is the special relationship in action. Sharing intelligence every day to keep our people safe. That is the special relationship in action. Hanging on to President Trump's latest words is not the special relationship in action.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, in the House of Commons today during Prime Minister's question time in London, answering questions from members of Parliament, that one coming from opposition, from the opposition Conservative Party. BBC News writes that Pedro Sanchez has delivered a strong rebuttal to U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to end trade with Spain by restating his opposition to war and what he called the breakdown of international law. In a 10-minute televised address, the Spanish Prime Minister reflected on the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, as well as the Iraq War more than 20 years ago, and said the Spanish government's position could be summed up as no to war. Trump threatened to impose a full trade embargo on Spain in response to its refusal to allow the U.S. to use the jointly run bases at Moron and Rochefort to strike Iran. The president said during a meeting with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz on Tuesday, Spain has been terrible. That's reporting from BBC News. Here's part of the national address by the Spanish Prime Minister.
Nobody knows for sure what will happen now. Neither are the objectives for the first attack at all clear. But we have to be prepared for the possibility of this war spilling over, and that there might be very serious consequences in world economic terms. The position of Spain in this situation is clear and consistent. It is the same position as we adopted for Ukraine and Gaza. First, we are against the breakdown of international order, which protects all of us, especially the most vulnerable, the civilian population. And secondly, the world's problems cannot be solved by conflict and bombing. And finally, we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. The position of the Spanish government can be summarized in these words: no to war.
The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez through an interpreter, part of his televised speech to his nation today. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said today he supports strikes on Iran with some regret. He spoke at a Sydney, Australia-based international policy think tank. He's on a three-nation visit to that part of the world, also stopping in India and Japan.
We support efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. Because Canada is taking the world as it is, not passively waiting for a world we wish to be. We do, however, take this position with regret because the current conflict is another example of the failure of the international order. Despite decades of UN Security Council resolutions, the tireless work of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the succession of sanctions and diplomatic frameworks, Iran's nuclear threat remains. And now, the United States and Israel have acted without engaging the United Nations or consulting allies, including Canada. So where to from here? With a rapidly spreading conflict and growing threats to civilian life. Canada reaffirms that international law binds all belligerents. We condemn the strikes carried out by Iran on civilians and civilian infrastructure across the Middle East. And we implore all parties, including the United States and Israel, to respect the rules of international engagement. Canada calls for a rapid de-escalation of hostilities and is prepared to assist in achieving this goal.
The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking at a think tank in Sydney, Australia. Washington Today continues in a moment.
In a divided media world, one place brings Americans together. According to a new Magid research report, nearly 90 million Americans turn to C-SPAN, and they're almost perfectly balanced. 28% conservative, 27% liberal or progressive, 41% moderate. Republicans watching Democrats, Democrats watching Republicans, moderates watching all sides. Because C-SPAN viewers want the facts, straight from the source. No commentary, no agenda, just democracy, unfiltered, every day on the C-SPAN networks.
Support for C-SPAN Radio comes from YouTube.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines from HuffPost. The House Oversight Committee on Wednesday voted to subpoena U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi over the Justice Department's failure to make public its records related to sex predator Jeffrey Epstein. The committee voted 24-19 on the resolution by Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican of South Carolina, with 5 Republicans and all Democrats in support. And from NBC News, the House on Wednesday voted to scuttle an effort by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace to shed more light on sexual misconduct allegations against members of Congress. In a 357 to 65 vote, the House voted to refer the Mace resolution to committee, a move that effectively killed it. MS Now reporting that while testifying before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem again refused to apologize for accusing Renee Good and Alex Preddy of participating in domestic terrorism immediately after they were shot dead by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. Good, a mother of 3 children and a poet, and Preddy, an ICU nurse, were both 37-year-old U.S. citizens killed in separate shootings by federal agents in Minneapolis in January. Their deaths, both captured on video, have led to increased national scrutiny into immigration and customs enforcement and Border Patrol agents and the often brutal enforcement tactics they employ against civilians. That reporting from MS Now. Here's part of today's hearing. We start with Secretary Noem as she's finishing up being questioned by the committee chair, Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, and then moving on to questions from the ranking member, Democrat Jamie Raskin of Maryland.
And it's interesting, Chairman, as you were talking, I was thinking about the last committee hearing I was at just a couple of months ago in December, that all the Democrats held up pictures of illegal aliens and were defending illegal aliens and talked about them. Now today they're defending citizens because they know they shouldn't be putting illegal aliens in front of citizens. They've changed their method. Now they realize that when they're fighting for people who shouldn't be in this country to begin with, that's a losing statement with the American people, that common sense would tell you somebody who lives here that is a citizen should be prioritized over someone from another country.
Well, but
that's common
Madam
sense.
Secretary, they're not only fighting for people here illegally, they're releasing the bad guys to the streets, for goodness sake.
They are.
That is the problem. With that, I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're fighting for American citizens, Madam Secretary.
Today
because,
you are.
because your ICE agents shot them in the face and killed them, and each person you see up on this dais today represents 800,000 American citizens. And you should know that as a former member of Congress. Now, her brother said that Renee Good was someone who could make you believe things were going to be okay despite all the hardship, because she chose optimism. Alex Preddy was a Boy Scout, a choir member, an outdoorsman from Green Bay who lavished attention on his beloved dog, Jewel. His sister called her brother someone who had a way of lighting up every room that he walked into. But only a few hours after they were gunned down by your agents, you called Renee a domestic terrorist. You said Alex committed an act of domestic terrorism. Alex's parents responded to your calling their son a domestic terrorist. They said, the sickening lies told about our son by the administration are reprehensible and disgusting. Now, I want to give you a chance before the entire country to correct your false and defamatory claim. Based on what you know today, Madam Secretary, were Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists?
Congressman, what happened in Minnesota in those 2 incidents was an absolute tragedy.
Were they domestic terrorists, as you said to the country?
My condolences to their families, because I know that their lives will never be the same after that happened.
Is that an apology for what you said?
We, in those incidents, offer as much information as we can from officers and agents on the ground in a chaotic scene that gets
I'll repeat my question, reclaiming my time. Based on what you know today, Madam Secretary, based on what you know today, were Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists?
As you know, there's ongoing investigations that are being led by the FBI.
Oh, but you didn't wait for the investigation, did you? You didn't wait for the evidence. You proclaimed that they were domestic terrorists at the time. Why did you do that?
And you didn't wait to attack our law enforcement.
Why did you do that?
We're going into a dangerous situation.
Why did you call them domestic terrorists?
Because our ICE officers and our HSI officers that day risked their lives to protect that scene. So evidence could be reclaimed. So it could be used in the investigation. Because those violent rioters that were
there. So you're
there
proud of the fact that you called them domestic terrorists? Is that what you're telling America?
HSI officers put their lives on the line to protect that scene, so evidence so we could have.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But you told a lie about them. You said that they were domestic terrorists. Do you regret that?
I offer my condolences to those families. And again,
based on what you know today, were Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists?
There's ongoing investigations, and so I can't.
So you still don't know. You think that's an open question?
I would think you would want there to still be investigations going into these situations.
Well, you stated the conclusion 2 hours after they were killed that they were domestic terrorists.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, questioning the witness, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, at today's hearing. Congressman Raskin, in his opening statement, also raised several other issues related to Secretary Noem: her department's relationship with the judiciary, her personal living accommodations, and a $200 million advertising campaign.
In Minnesota, Judge Patrick Schultz, a George W. Bush appointee, concluded, quote, that ICE has likely violated more court orders in January of 2026 than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence. And while you make a daily mockery of our courts and our Constitution, you're treating the billions of dollars our colleagues showered on your department like a personal slush fund. You budgeted an astonishing $220 million for media consultant contracts so you can star in self-promoting photo shoots and lavish ad campaigns like this one of you riding horseback at Mount Rushmore, which was shot during last year's government shutdown. You're living rent-free in the official waterfront residence reserved for the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. You spent $172 million to buy not one, but 2 luxury jets for your travel, and now you're using taxpayer funds to lease a 3rd jet, a $70 million luxury 737 MAX with a queen-size bedroom in the back, a deluxe serving bar, and 4 flat-screen TVs. A big, beautiful jet paid for by the big, beautiful bill.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, opening up today's hearing. New York Times reporting about the hearing. Secretary Noem said she was not aware of instances in which Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials had lied to federal judges or violated court orders. And from Fox News on the hearing, Department of Homeland Security Deputy Assistant Secretary Lauren Biz told Fox News Digital that DHS's international ad campaign prompted more than 2.2 million illegal immigrants to self-deport and saved taxpayers more than $39 billion, pushing back on Democratic lawmakers who criticized the roughly $200 million initiative. And about where Secretary Noem is living, more from today's hearing. Questions from Congressman Darrell Issa, Republican from California.
When the ranking member spends so much time talking about your being in a protective housing, by the way, one that is under your authority and one that the head of the Coast Guard normally would be in, I'm just going to make a statement, a view, an opinion, and hopefully the ranking member will agree with this opinion. The chances that the Commandant of the Coast Guard is going to be attacked for the job he's doing, and the chance that you will be attacked, causes both of you to be in protective housing. You're simply in the housing that he historically had, and I want to thank the administration for recognizing the threat on you and your family for the work you do. Yes.
Let me clarify a couple of things. I'm not in the Commandant's house. I'm in a Coast Guard house, but not the Commandant's house. The Commandant is in his house. And I will also tell you that I rent that facility. I rent where I stay and pay personal dollars to do that.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem during today's Judiciary Committee hearing, questioned by Congressman Darrell Issa, Republican from California. We covered this hearing on the C-SPAN networks. You can find the full video at cspan.org. E&E News reporting today a federal judge is allowing a coalition of federal labor unions and other groups to question Secretary Noem under oath in relation to a lawsuit challenging the mass dismissal of disaster workers. The lawyers defending Noem said FEMA officials fired the officials. That contradicted the agency's leader, who had said the Department of Homeland Security had initiated the firings. FEMA is part of DHS, reporting from E&E News. From the Hill, the House on Wednesday advanced a GOP-backed Department of Homeland Security funding bill, an effort by Republicans to pressure Democrats to end the partial government shutdown in the wake of the U.S. launching strikes against Iran. The panel voted 211 to 209 to pass the rule, which tees up debate and a vote on the final passage of the measure. The bill is expected to pass the lower chamber on Thursday. The DHS bill is largely identical to the one that passed the lower chamber in January before the death of 37-year-old Minneapolis nurse Alex Preddy sparked outrage among Democrats and intensified calls to rein in immigration and customs enforcement. Reporting from the Hill, here's some of the House floor debate before that vote. Congressman Andrew Garbarino is a Republican from New York, chairs the Homeland Security Committee, followed by Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez, Democrat from New Mexico, a member of the Rules Committee.
As America faces heightened threats on U.S. soil and abroad, DHS is in the midst of the second major shutdown in 6 months because of Democrats' political games. This lapse in appropriations means a disruption in our nation's disaster preparedness, transportation security, and critical infrastructure resilience when we need it most. As a lifelong New Yorker, I find it outrageous that DHS continues to be undermined by Washington's dysfunction. 25 years after the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil, I urge my Democratic colleagues to not forget why this department was established in the first place. As we speak, the vast majority of DHS personnel are once again continuing their essential missions to protect the American people without knowing when their next paycheck will be, while others have been furloughed, further undermining our preparedness. The frustrating reality is this was completely avoidable. House Republicans sent this bipartisan, bicameral deal for full DHS funding to the Senate nearly 2 months ago. This bill includes funding for body cameras, support for the DHS Office of Inspector General, additional resources for training, and new transparency and oversight requirements for ICE. By holding this bill up in the Senate, Democrats are blocking funding for FEMA's preparedness, response, and recovery efforts across the country. They're blocking funding for TSA ahead of major events like the World Cup. Democrats are blocking the Coast Guard operations that we use to counter our adversaries. They are blocking our funding for our cybersecurity workforce while Iran is attacking us daily in our cybersecurity terrain. The security of our homeland is not a partisan talking point. It is an American imperative. Holding DHS hostage when lives and livelihoods are on the line or reckless, I urge our Democrats to show their Senate counterparts to support this bill and do the right thing. Thank you. I yield back.
We reserve.
Gentlewoman from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much. You know what? And now that we're on the point of thank yous, my colleagues suggested that I get up and thank them for bringing this bill again. Well, I do think it is a waste of House resources to do the same thing over again, but I do thank you because we are able to make the point again to the American people about how bad ICE is. The American people agree with us that what ICE is doing is not American. It's not American to kill us. Point blank, murderers, for doing nothing more than using a phone to video what they're doing. But, Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 7481, the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act 2026, a bill which fully funds law-abiding agencies under the Department of Homeland Security and not the unlawful actions of ICE and CBP. Because we agree, we need to fund FEMA, TSA, and the Coast Guard. And there's no reason to have these important agencies tied to the funding for Trump's ICE cruelty agenda. Indeed, Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro introduced a bill to fund FEMA, TSA, and the Coast Guard. Last night at Walz, I tried to make her bill in order so the House could vote on it, so the House could say, yes, we believe in these agencies and we want to fund them. Every single Republican in the committee voted against it. So let's be honest about who is voting against funding for the Coast Guard, for TSA, and for these agencies. It is Republicans. Republicans voted against it last night, but we're going to ask Republicans once again, will you vote to fund Coast Guard, FEMA, the TSA? We will ask you, will you vote for that? Because we're going to give you another opportunity to do that.
Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez, Democrat from New Mexico, and before that, Congressman Andrew Garbarino, Republican from New York, on the House floor today before the House defeated that procedural motion offered by the Democrats called the previous question and then went on to vote on the underlying resolution 211 to 209, setting up the rules for debate on another attempt to fund the Homeland Security Department. that is expected to be voted on Thursday. This is day 19 of the Homeland Security Department shutdown. USA Today article from Tuesday reads, the poly market government shutdown betting odds and call sheet betting odds predict the shutdown will last 44 to 46 days per live bets and trades on the legal U.S. prediction markets. Another AP article, Minnesota's governor and attorney general on Wednesday defended their efforts to combat fraud and told the U.S. House committee that their efforts have been hampered by President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown in the state. Republicans on the House Oversight Committee accused Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison of stalling to fight fraud in government programs, saying they put politics ahead of rooting out abuse instead of pausing payments. That was from Associated Press. Here are some of the questions at the hearing from the chair, Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, to Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison.
During the time period 2019 and 2020, while you were serving as governor, isn't it true that state auditors and officials raised concerns about fraud and vulnerabilities in programs overseen by your administration?
I can't confirm that, but I'm assuming we have always ongoing OLA.
I'll take that as a yes. Those warnings were communicated to senior officials in your administration, including yourself, correct?
I can't speak if it was directly.
I think the correct answer to that would also be yes. Despite those warnings, you did not order a broad stop payment or suspension of payment in any program at that time, correct?
We're not going to stop payments of feed children until we have the proof that things happen. In 2019, we did start taking action. I went to the legislature, that legislative
Governor
session.
Walz, when fraud concerns were raised early in your tenure in the Child Care Assistance Program, did your administration stop payments at that time?
The Child Care Assistance Program and
the answer is no. When fraud concerns were raised...
Would you like me to answer or not, Chairman?
Well, it's yes or no.
I want you to help.
You've already answered the question. You said you didn't ever stop payments, and that's what the problem is, and that's what the Democrats are complaining about. Oh, my gosh, Trump stopped payments. Well, my God, you lost billions to fraud in Minnesota. That's what this hearing's about.
Mr. Chairman,
you didn't stop payments because you didn't want to rock the boat. And when fraud concerns
That's not
were
correct,
raised...
Chairman.
When fraud concerns were raised in Medicaid, home and community-based services, did your administration stop payments? No, you did not. When fraud concerns were raised in non-emergency medical transportation, did your administration stop payments?
Chairman, if I could mention what a stop payment meant by what the administration did last week is 400,000 children without health care. Are you stopping payment if one person?
We believe that's your fault and the Attorney General's fault because you do nothing about fraud, even though everyone in America sees
our Medicare
with their
error rate
own
is
eyes
lower than your
the
state.
Fraud. You have been defrauded. You have not been good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And the Democrat position is, well, keep the money flowing. The American taxpayers have had enough.
I think that's a fair characterization.
They want their taxpayer dollars spent wisely. We all support social programs.
That's not a fair
to the vulnerable,
characterization.
but if you're going to waste the money to fraudsters, then we have to stop and recalculate.
We're not. We're putting them in jail when we can, Chairman. And some of these programs are crafted in such a way that there's a procedure to follow. And I'm with you. $1 is too much. I don't think there's a lot of difference here if you want to help us get at this. The question is it a sledgehammer? Is it a scalpel? I understand there's no political upside to it.
Let's get into what we've talked. You eventually did pause payments in certain programs, but that wasn't until late 2025 after the federal government stepped in. Is that correct?
I don't think that's a fair characterization of stepped in. We've been partners in this and working on them. But
let's move on. And that decision occurred only after large-scale fraud had already taken place for years. Now, Governor Walz, employees inside state agencies raised concerns about fraud and improper payments for years. Is that correct?
Inside agencies, we've been prosecuting them for years. Yes.
But they have raised concern. Agencies have raised concern about fraud in Minnesota, correct? For
Each
years.
of those, yes, when they do and they're prosecuted. Yes.
Some of those employees faced retaliation after raising those concerns. Is that correct?
That is not correct, Chairman.
Okay.
Minnesota has strong whistleblower protections.
Attorney General Ellison, you are the chief legal officer of the state of Minnesota, correct?
Yes.
Your office advises agencies on compliance with federal and state law, correct?
Yes.
Retaliation against whistleblowers reporting fraud is unlawful, correct?
That is right.
At any point during your tenure, did you tell state agencies to stop payments due to credible fraud allegations, yes or no?
Sir, we prosecuted over 300 people in the Medicaid fraud area.
300, I would
them.
predict is a drop in the bucket, but you've never said to stop payments. That's
it's one of the highest rates in the country, sir.
Well, you have one of the highest fraud rates in the country in Minnesota.
That's not true. And my office doesn't have the authority to do a stop payment. We prosecute criminals when they're presented us by the agency.
So the answer is no, unfortunately. No one's ever from your office said to stop payments until we can get the fraud under control. So to summarize, you both knew about fraud, risk, and payments continued. Our investigation has shown that whistleblowers who were alerted about the widespread fraud were ignored, sidelined, and even retaliated against. Only after federal authorities ultimately stepped in did you take any action. It's not this committee's responsibility to decide guilt or dole out punishment, but it's clear there was a massive failure of oversight and, quite frankly, a failure of leadership. One wonders whether either of you should bear some personal responsibility for the billions of dollars siphoned off by fraudsters under your noses in the state that you led.
Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, questioning the witnesses, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison, both Democrats, at today's hearing in Washington. Ellison also said his office has punched above its weight in winning 300 Medicaid fraud convictions and recovering more than $80 million for taxpayers. The hearing ran about 4 hours. You can find the full video at cspan.org. Fox News writes that tech giants have backed a pledge from President Donald Trump to pay more for electricity to run resource-hungry AI data centers ahead of its signing on Wednesday. Google, Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, xAI, OpenAI, and Amazon will join Trump at the White House to sign the Ratepayer Protection Pledge, an agreement to ensure expenses for the infrastructure and power delivery for the data centers are not passed on to the public, according to a White House official reporting from Fox News. Here's President Trump meeting with the tech company leaders in the Eisenhower Executive Office building.
We're here this afternoon for a historic signing that will help keep down utility bills very, very substantially and electricity prices for millions of Americans and in many cases for a lot of people that don't really understand why they're going up, but they're not going to be going up. They're going to be actually going down. Today we follow through on an announcement I made in my State of the Union address last week as America's largest tech companies officially signed the Ratepayer Protection Pledge. It's a big deal. It's going to have a tremendous impact on electricity costs. We're bringing down all of the costs. We have this little interlude to do what we have to do because we had it going, but these interludes are very important, especially this one. But the economy has never been like this. We broke 50,000 on the Dow. People thought we wouldn't do that within the first 4 years. We did it in the first year. And we brought 7 on the S&P, 7,000 on the S&P. They said that's even less likely to happen. And we did that too, all within the first year. Under this new agreement, big tech companies are committing to fully cover the cost of increased electricity production required for AI data centers. And that would be prices for American communities will not go up, but in many cases will actually come down and very substantially. Because, you know, the data centers, and you people are so big, you're the biggest in the world, but they've developed a little bit of a bad public, they need some PR help. Because people think that if a data center goes in, their electricity prices are going to go up, and that's not happening. It's not going to happen. And for the areas where it did happen, it won't happen anymore because they never had this alternative.
President Donald Trump at an event titled Ratepayer Protection Pledge, meeting with executives from large technology companies in the Eisenhower Executive Office building right next to the White House. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said today the president would likely this week increase the 10% global tariff rate he imposed to 15%. These new tariffs replace the president's higher and more permanent tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court in February because they were not allowed under the economic emergency law the president tried to use. The president can impose tariffs under this separate law for 150 days, and he longer requires congressional approval. Wall Street today, the Dow up 238, NASDAQ up 290, S&P up 52. CNN writes that President Donald Trump announced Wednesday that he would be endorsing in Texas's Republican primary for U.S. Senate between incumbent John Cornyn and State Attorney General Ken Paxton, and demanding that the candidate he doesn't choose drop out. He wrote on Truth Social, "It must stop now. We have an easy-to-beat radical left opponent, and we have to totally focus on putting him away quickly and decisively. Both John and Ken ran great races, but not good enough. Now this one must be perfect." The president's announcement comes after months of staying neutral in the nasty Texas GOP primary that is now set to become a bruising and expensive runoff election. That was from CNN. CNN interviewed Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, who said he'll be staying neutral in the contest, and Senator John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, the majority whip, who said he'll back John Cornyn.
John Cornyn is a good friend of mine. Ken Paxton is a good friend of mine. I have endorsed both of them previously. I've campaigned with both of them previously. And as I've said from the beginning of this race, I'm staying out of the race. I trust the voters of Texas. We're going to have a runoff. It will be vigorously contested, and the people of Texas will decide.
Do you think the president needs to make an endorsement?
Look, the president will make his own decision on that. At least to date, he's made the same decision I have made, which is to let the voters decide. He obviously could change his mind. I don't know if he will or not.
We need somebody to win that runoff who will then win the Senate seat, to hold that Republican Senate seat for President Trump and for a Republican majority. That person is John Cornyn. If you take a look at the turnout yesterday in Texas, there were actually more Democrats that voted in the primary than Republicans that voted in the primary, which shows that the Democrats in Texas are motivated. They are motivated to turn out. John Cornyn wins that race for the Republicans and for the people of Texas. I support him fully.
Senator John Barrasso, the majority whip, Republican from Wyoming. Before that, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, interviewed by CNN. The winner of the runoff on the Republican side will face Democratic State Senator James Tallarico in the November election for the U.S. Senate seat. Tallarico beat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in Tuesday's Democratic primary, and she put out a statement today. This morning, I called James and congratulated him on becoming the Senate nominee. Texas is primed to turn blue, and we must remain united because this is bigger than any one person. This is about the future of all 30 million Texans and getting America back on track. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the latest in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.